So, flash photography. This is something I admit I didn't know much about. Sure, I had taken some photos with my Yashica T4 using flash before, but it was all automatic and it wasn't my choice. But this time around, I accepted a challenge to introduce flash to my photography and shoot with two different flashes by Godox, the Lux Junior and the Lux Senior. But before we get into that, I was curious about the history of flash photography, which is honestly very interesting. And so this video is going to have three different parts. So we're going to be looking, first of all, briefly, of course, at the history of flash photography. Then second of all, we're going to be looking at some iconic photographs and some names that I think we should be familiar with when we talk about flash photography. And then third, I'm going to be sharing my experiences with using flash in my photography, different uses of flash that I kind of found, and obviously I'm going to share some results that I've shot in different locations and with different sort of settings. And yeah, I guess that it's all for this intro, so buckle up, grab your drink, make yourself comfortable, and let's go straight to another video.
I like the way that you talk to me. I like the way that you walk with me. I like the way that you hold me tight. I like the way you say that everything's fine. I really think that I'm in love with you. I like the way you do the thing that you do. I know you love me, darling, I'm no fool. I get a burning feeling deep inside.
Well, as the story goes, over time, inventors and those technically able put their minds into creating daredevilish solutions to overcome darkness, literally speaking. And so this venture started between the mid to the late 1800s, where magnesium studies showed that this metal, when burned, could produce a light similar to daylight. And so, to photograph, photographers used a specific amount of magnesium powder and potassium chlorate, which they would put into a pan and then ignite by hand. And although this was a very smoky and very noisy practice, it was more importantly very dangerous, as many photographers ended up seriously injured and worse. However, with the turn of the century, specifically in 1899, a gentleman by the name of Joshua Cohen invented what was an electrically triggered lamp called the electric flash lamp, which could trigger the flash using batteries and was normally connected to the shutter, allowing the flash to be activated as the photographer snapped the photo. But the 1930s brought a much safer option known as the flash bulb, and although these had been in development since the 1880s, it was only in the 1930s that it became more effective. However, there was still one downside to all of these practices: the fact that each bulb, just like the flash lamps and the flash powder before, were all of single use, being too hot to handle afterwards and requiring constant changing or refilling in the case of flash powder. And during the 1950s, things became a bit wild, with different types and sizes of flash being put in the market from all corners, as well as flash guns with their large plates, which until today mark the image the general audience has of what a photographer looked like back in the day. But the 1960s brought significant changes. Enters Kodak and their flash cubes. And the flash cube had 4 different flash bulbs for usage. And once you snapped your photo, you'd have to rotate the cube to use the next flash bulb. And in the midst of all this, electronic flashes, which had been in development since 1931, would definitely gain notoriety in the following decades, as the technological development would carry on, bringing us slowly into a more progressively digital world, which is the world we know today. And these types of flashes basically work thanks to a capacitor that can store power for later, and when triggered, the capacitor releases its energy through a flash tube which contains gas that produces an intensely bright light. And now that we've seen that if we were born maybe a century ago or so, we probably would have burned our hands or worse with using a flash, we can kind of be more grateful for what technology has done for us so far. But also it makes us appreciative of photographers back then as well, because it was a hard job to be a photographer back then. you had to carry heavy equipment. It wasn't that easy, with kind of like setting up focus, setting up lighting and etc. Especially if you were shooting the streets. It was much, much difficult than it is now if you're using a digital camera, but also if you use a film camera, especially because you have all these different things that came up, accessories with over time. And obviously, film cameras can also incorporate some digital technology, as we've seen with different Nikon cameras and etc. And so I think this is kind of like a way of us having a look at the past and being appreciative of it as well. And now that we're having a look at the past and taking that cue, why don't we have a look at some of the photographers that, over the course of photography's history, have shot with flash and have done a significantly interesting work that is worth to mention, but also worth to have a look. So I highly advise that all the photographers that I'm going to be mentioning, that you kind of like dive deep. I'm going to be leaving links down below, but you dive deep into them because they're very, very interesting people with a very interesting body of work. And so throughout the history of photography in modern times, flash photography has had its consistent use despite the fact that certain decades such as the 1940s, the 70s and the 90s can be considered peaks of flash photography, with the work of certain photographers like Weegee, whose persona was described as larger than life and quite eccentric. And his work revolves around portraits of crime scenes, fires, moments of despair and the bizarre, but in reverse also of Hollywood stars and highly popular figures at the time. And another photographer I'd like to mention is Arnold, whose work I've come across quite recently, and she worked around a similar time frame as Weegee did, and she's known for her incredible intimate portraits of high-profile people such as Marilyn Monroe, but as well as for her groundbreaking documentary photography work. And following this trend during the 1990s and the early 2000s, with the spread of flash photography in the fashion industry, we can highlight then the work of Ritts, Jürgen Teller, or Corinne Day. Now, I did say in the beginning of this episode that I was going to introduce you to different flashes that I've been using, and I wanted to talk to you about them and kind of like their specs, but also like how cool they are because they have this really retro look, which is what kind of like caught my eye at first. And so we're going to be talking about two different flashes that Godox kindly sent me, and that is the Lux Senior and the Lux Junior. So Godox has taken inspiration from the past, say flashes designed in the 1950s and 60s, to build two modern day flashes that combine this retro look with the present technology, and both these flashes can be used with digital and film cameras. So you can use them with all your equipment, whether you're a digital photographer, a film photographer, or someone that dives in between. Now, this little flash is the Lux Junior, and its design emulates the 1970s and 1980s. And the best thing about it is definitely its simplicity. You have two modes you can choose from, the auto flash mode, which is designed to help you calculate a proper exposure, and a manual flash mode, which of course, as the name indicates, gives you more control by letting you choose your settings. And honestly, this is a very discreet flash, and I've been using it in different spaces and times a day, as you can see by these images, and overall I'm very happy with the results. But I've also been using its big brother, the Lux Senior, which is a much more powerful flash, but also equally as versatile, easy to manage and portable as a Junior. And whilst the Junior is powered by two AAA batteries, the Senior has an integrated battery that you can charge with a USB-C cable. The battery itself is good for at least 150 full power flashes, with only approximately 3 to 5 second recycle time between shots, which is very impressive. And both of these came with sync cables and the little bags that you can carry them around, but as you can see by the ratio of their size in my hands, they're very, very small and very, very compact, especially the Lux Senior. I was quite surprised with how compact it was, and I traveled with them everywhere, either every day, kind of like life, or also like, traveling abroad. I've recently been to France and to Ireland, and I've taken them with me, and I think this is very, very interesting overall, very interesting products, and with different reaches, but also like very versatile in terms of like what you can use them for. And most importantly, when we talk about obviously gear and tools for your photography, is the price point. And one of the things that I like the most about these is that in terms of price point, you can try one of them or both without having to leave your wallet depressed. And that is a very good thing these days. So I'd like to direct you down below for the links for these two, and you're welcome to check them out. And thank you Godox for sponsoring this video. And now let's go back to the segment where I talk about the uses of flash in photography. Now, as a photographer, I'm mostly interested in learning, adding to my experience, because photography, like everything else in life, it's all a learning curve. And I'm interested in getting better as a photographer in terms of skills, because obviously nobody's perfect, and I too make a lot of mistakes, just like everyone else in life and the world. And so I'm interested in obviously getting better, but I feel like we have to get better by taking these challenges and kind of like stepping sometimes out of our comfort zone and experiencing new things. And in this case, I'm very grateful that I tried flash photography and I work with these particular flashes, because I've learned a lot. And so I've learned a lot about how I can use flash and different uses of flash in my photography and in photography in general, I would say. But for me particularly, this would be what I would use flash for. And so shooting with flash was an interesting challenge, because it also helped me realize that flash has more uses and purposes than the general lighting a scene purpose. And so I started my flash photography journey by testing what I read that flash can evoke a feeling of closeness to the subjects, and added a more raw and authentic dimension to the images, making them in a way more genuine. So I started by setting up a little corner in my living room and asking my friend Kaio to work with me. And as we talked and I directed him into certain poses or expressions, I snapped away with both digital and my film camera, the Canon A1, using the Lux Junior. And as I shot with and without flash, I could compare the results. And here I learned that flash can be used to light the scene, but it can also be used as a tool to use for creative purposes, which can be used deliberately to create drama or add drama to a scene, and also to achieve certain aesthetics such as harsh contrasts, pop the color in the scene, and much more. And here I was playing with a studio light, a honeycomb, and also some colored gels. However, I was recently traveling in France, and I decided to take the Lux Senior with me and use it within my photography style to serve as a fill light and working on less contrasted black and white images. And since this was a much more powerful flash, I used it mostly with Mamma Mia 7, and trust me, I felt as cool as Marty in Back to the Future, except my shoes weren't that cool and I was doing the inverse, going back to the past, which was quite the experience. And looking at some of the results, the flash is not this harsh light that we would know flash for, but rather an interesting and soft fill-in light, which helped me achieve a dreamy sort of mood in certain images. And so this has been all for today, so I'd like to thank you so much for watching and supporting the channel, the constant messages and emails, lovely emails. And I would like to thank you all so much. It really means a lot to me and I really appreciate it. But also I like to know how good the videos can be in terms of like helping you out there and, giving you some sort of like, more information or inspiration, whatever it is. It's just good for me that it's being helpful. So thank you so much for letting me know. And yeah, I hope that you stay tuned with the channel. There's a lot more happening. But also before going, I have to thank Godox for sponsoring this video, for letting me be creative. So if you want to check these flashes out down below, the links will be there. And also links for the photographers mentioned and my print shop if you would like to grab a print. And I have to say that this print shop will be updated soon. So yeah, keep an eye out for it. And I guess that I'll be seeing you here for another video very soon. So stay safe, keep shooting, film or digital, and subscribe for a cookie.